I'm going to show you how a drinks bottle and a tennis ball could really transform your game by working on one of the most important parts of the golf swing, the transition. We know impact is key. We know that how we deliver the club is vitally important to playing good golf, but what we do in transition can make that more or less likely to happen. Get the transition wrong and an impact that's efficient becomes almost impossible. So we're going to cover in this video 3 of the most common faults I see in transition, which just give golfers so many issues down an impact and obviously in the resulting ball flight. The first one, standing up too soon. So we start and we address our golf ball in a posture. But all too often, during that transition phase, the golfer will stand up this way. Now, we're not really talking early extension because that would be a real thrust into the ball, but it's a golfer who pushes off the ground far too early. The great golfers, and especially the golfers who hit it a long way, they also push off the ground. But they push off the ground from about here. They're using that pushing force through impact. If you use it in transition and you start to push too early, you've got nothing left down at impact, and so you end up having to just use hands and arms, not efficient. So, first little exercise, no golf club, because that can often complicate things when we're looking at body movement. Hands across the chest, get yourself into posture. Now I want you to sort of take almost like a snapshot of where you are, picture where your legs are and everything, and you're going to make a little backswing rotation. And you're going to move back to that starting position with some force, trying to increase the angles in your body. So I would do this. Okay, so there's my start, there's my backswing. I've increased, and you can see how my head is going slightly downwards. Now, I wouldn't advise anybody to drop their head, but take a look at the great players. Your Tigers, your Rorys, you often see a little bit of drop in the head. Yeah, it's not because they're dipping into the golf ball, it's because they're simply making this move where they're increasing the angles in their body and they're starting to prepare themselves to use the ground through impact. So this little exercise is great. It starts to get you to really understand how we lower ourselves into the golf ball, which means that you're then pretty much guaranteed to want to jump through impact. So the final phase that would be that movement through the ball. So we go up, we make this move, and then we use our legs and we push up through to our finish. And we can really start to do that with some awareness. Because we haven't got the golf club there, we can really focus on what the body's doing and the movements that it needs to move like that. Now, I don't mind in that exercise if you're doing that a little bit too extreme. There's a little bit too much drop, but it's fine, it's creating the movements. Now, the second most common fault is the lead shoulder. And it sort of follows on from that first point, but it is slightly different. What we often see with golfers who struggle is from the top, this lead shoulder would begin its movement towards the ball and it would start to go upwards far too soon. Now you'll notice what's happening to my head when it does that. It sort of forces my head backwards and almost a little bit down towards the target. You'll notice I get kind of more tilt through my eyes, the peak of my hat is tilted, and that's all a result of this shoulder going up too early. Now you can imagine what it's going to do to the contact. It's going to increase the chances of me landing the club before the ball. I'm more likely to be adding loft at impact. That's going to take distance off the shots. It's going to cause my strike to be poor. The best players, completely different movement in that lead shoulder. I'm probably going to exaggerate this slightly, but from the top, they will often move that lead shoulder in front of the ball and down this way before it then starts to move upwards. Quite similar to that first little point, in that they're using that shoulder to drive down in front of the golf ball before they use it to then pull up and away. And that's why we see these extended positions through the golf ball. If your shoulder's going up too early, it's going to have to stall for you to then try and catch up with your hands. And if you look on video and see anything like this through impact, it's likely to do with that lead shoulder. This is where our first little homemade training aid comes in. We're going to use this tennis ball. I'm going to take a set up to this ball, and where my lead foot would be, I'm going to place that tennis ball. Now obviously that's half a tennis ball, I've cut it in half. And what I now do is I take my normal address, but I'm just going to bring my lead foot inside the tennis ball. And what I really want you to do is in transition, squash it. Squash that tennis ball as much as you can with as much force as you can. And what that will encourage you to do is drive this lead shoulder in this direction, forwards and down, because I'm trying to put a force through that tennis ball. This will also help with that first point. You know, we've spoken already about how we want to increase the angles. Well, when I'm trying to drive into that tennis ball, it will generally help me stay in those great angles, but it will also help me with this lead shoulder position. This lead shoulder helps me get in front of the golf ball. It helps me deliver the handle forwards. It helps me put compression on the golf ball. It helps me move my low point more that way. Those are all things that great players do, and all things that poor golfers tend not to do. So a tennis ball is brilliant. And there's no reason why you couldn't go ahead and hit some little shots. I'm going to do this. The ball is not going to go anywhere near that green, but it's going to help me in that transition deliver the club. So we go back, we step, and then I pivot out. And although that ball's only flown 60, 70 yards, the strike was great. It was perfect. It felt compressed. It felt solid. It felt like it should feel. And that's what we're after in that little exercise. It's going to help you with ball striking. So, tennis ball. Pretty simple. Hopefully you can all get your hands on one of those. Keep it in your golf bag. Great for when you head to the range and practice. Right, our last, well, I was going to call it a homemade training aid, but you probably don't need to make this, do you? You should have one. It's a bottle. It doesn't have to be water. As long as it's a bottle, it will work. And this is going to help us work on our third most common fault, which would be from the top. A golfer potentially is trying to rotate more. They're trying to use their body better, and they will get some rotation, but no shift. So I'm not going to call it an early spin out because we often want the hips to rotate, but it's a spin or a rotation without the lateral shift. If you don't have the lateral shift, you can almost say goodbye to your good strikes because you're just not going to land the club in the right place. It's always going to be early. So what happens when we rotate the hips too early is that we tend to find the weight stays too central, or it might even shift that back foot. When that happens, keep your eye on that trail heel. When we rotate and we go through to our finish, the foot spins away from the target. Depending on the golf shoes, you may hit shots and see this almost this twisted pattern on the ground. That's a great indication that you're not using the hips correctly. So if I was to take a setup, place this drinks bottle behind my heel, hit a full shot with a bad movement, number one, it felt pretty horrible off the club face. I landed the club before, bottle's gone over, and I've got this big sort of swirling mark on the ground which tells my foot spun. That's obviously not what I want. So the idea would be that you work toward making golf swings where the bottle can stay in place. So popping it just outside the heel. And then if from the top I'm able to add some shift with my lower body, lead shoulder moves correctly, flex increases. Now when I start to rotate my hips, I'm going to get a very different movement through that foot and through that heel. I'm able to finish correctly, lots of rotation, but the bottle stayed in place and I didn't damage the golf course. So it's an external drill. It's brilliant because there's no grey areas. You know, the bottle stays in place or it goes. You can't really have anything in between. So let's go ahead and see if I can hit a shot, leave the bottle in place and do it correctly.